It's not an exaggeration to say that the US president has thrown the world into disarray.
I know things seem like they're spinning out of control right now, but I want to reassure you that everything is going to be okay. I want to, but I can't.
I think chaos is a big part of Trump's strategy.
There's a term that applies to what the Trump administration is doing: weaponized uncertainty.
I'm going to say this at risk of my job, Kelly, but what President Trump is doing is insane. It is absolutely insane.
Yesterday, the Dow slipped on Trump's tariffs and fell down an elevator shaft. And today, it kept bonking its head on the way down, plunging more than 400 points. In the last 3 weeks in total, the stock market has lost $4 trillion in value, and experts now say the risk of a recession is 40%.
Ukraine, Europe, Mexico and Canada, China, Australia, and even America's great friend, Ireland. The flip-flops on tariffs, praise and threats in the same meet and greet in the Oval Office. The world's most powerful man is quick to take offence and faster to retaliate. Up until now, most world leaders have tiptoed around him, blatantly buttering him up to stay on his good side, like UK PM Keir Starmer inviting Trump to visit King Charles.
This is really special. This has never happened before. This is unprecedented. I think that just symbolises the strength of the relationship between us. So this is a very special letter.
The answer is yes. On behalf of our wonderful First Lady, Melania, and myself, the answer is yes.
And the Irish President, Michael Martin.
I thank you for your hospitality and the warmth of your reception. And I commend you in terms of the work that you're doing, particularly in terms of the pursuit of peace, which we discussed earlier. And I think that's going well. And you really have, in the first sort of 100 days of this government, you've done some extraordinary things very quickly.
Thank you.
He managed to prostrate himself before Trump turned on him over the issue of pharmaceuticals. Then there's the President of Finland, Alexander Stubb, very aware that his televised comments will get back to America.
What I want to say is that listen to what President Trump has to say and act accordingly. A country like Finland will certainly do that.
Others, like Canada, are not holding back.
Donald Trump, as we know, has put unjustified tariffs on what we build, on what we sell, on how we make a living. He's attacking Canadian families, workers, and businesses, and we cannot let him succeed.
And what about Australia's former PM Malcolm Turnbull?
This is a very different United States. Trump does not subscribe to the same values that we have in the past shared with America. He doesn't have a commitment to the international rule of law, that's obvious.
I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly, and today on The Detail, when is it time for world leaders to speak truth to power? And why are some world leaders still tiptoeing around Trump while others are lashing out? Alexia Russell spoke to former New Zealand ambassador to the United States and former Minister of Trade Tim Groser. She asked, with Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters currently in Washington, what should New Zealand be doing?
Oh, I'm not going to tell Mr. Peters what he needs to do. He's a very experienced foreign minister and politician. What I think he will do, and it's consistent if you look carefully at the press statement his office released on this visit, is he will be very measured and very calm and avoid rhetorical fights in public. I'm certain of that.
Okay, so it's more a case of what does he not do?
Well, not do in public. This comes down to the sort of large incomprehension, not just in New Zealand, but in public opinion around the world about what the nature of diplomacy is. I remember when I was a young foreign ministry official many years ago, being told by one of our most senior people that from time to time, Tim, he said, you will have to go through life in certain crises in which your public comments will make you look like an amiable idiot. In other words, he was saying to me as a young diplomat, just preserve your real position for private discussions, because very little, if anything, can be gained by public spats. People want it because it feels satisfying. But look, we've just had a perfect, unfortunately, very, very tragic demonstration of this in the infamous meeting between President Zelensky and President Trump and Vice President Vance, in which, I would guess that the vast majority of New Zealanders would feel like me, that if there is an important political leader on the planet today that deserves the title heroic, it would be President Zelensky. But he clearly made a big strategic error by publicly arguing with the president and the vice president in vociferous terms.
But Tim, the ground has shifted so far with Trump in charge, hasn't it, that the usual norms of diplomacy have ceased to apply?
Well, the ground has shifted dramatically, but I'm not sure that what constitutes effective diplomacy have shifted. Most certainly, you are right. The rules of diplomacy have changed dramatically with respect to the United States. And since it is the United States that underwrote the post-war order, this matters immensely. But on the other hand, the rest of our friends, from Australia through to France, through to the UK, through to Japan and other countries that we deal with habitually, I don't think they've changed the rules. They still want to get back to a rules-based approach based on strong partnerships of some enduring nature. Now, my personal view is this has got a long way to play out, and it will be determined whether this is the final end, if you like, of the rules-based system. It's taken a hell of a hammering in the last little while. This remains to be seen. It will be determined largely by what happens in terms of the US political reaction. So we've already seen polls indicating that 56% of Americans already, after only 2 months, disapprove of the way the administration is handling economic policy. We've seen polls saying 70% of Americans believe their prices will increase because of tariffs. And eventually this will feed through the political process into the US position. So we've just got to play this long until we see how this plays out.
Do you think world leaders were not expecting Trump take two? That they were expecting a sort of fairly mild version of the last time he was in power, and suddenly this?
I think so. Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I've had discussions. I went up to Tokyo in December on another matter, but I met some of my old friends, including the former Japanese ambassador to the United States and others. And I mean, they were quite explicit. They thought, oh, well, we'll be in for a rough intro, but we'll play it how we played it last time. So I think your premise is 100% right. People were thinking, look, we just offer a few concessions and we'll get through it as we did last time. So I think people have been very surprised by what has happened and the degree to which this strategy is being implemented with force, rigor. So, yes, in that sense, I think it has been a bit of a surprise.
Has it made us all realise that America is the centre of the world? Because when America starts playing these games, the whole world is affected.
Well, I think it's, for people like me who spent their lives, professional lives in this system, because before I went into politics, I was New Zealand's chief trade negotiator, largely in Geneva for many, many years. I think people like me always understood that reality. But it's certainly been reinforced for people who have lived, shall we say, more balanced lives than I have. So, yes, this really has been reasserted.
It seems to me, and I'm not the expert here, but these are the actions of more of a dictator than a president.
Look, after 40 years in diplomacy, I avoid.
You're not naming names. Okay.
I can't change habits of a lifetime. Sorry.
The other issue that arises from this is Canada's leaders have been in stark contrast to some of Europe's leaders who are being a bit tiptoey here. Trudeau and then Carney, and particularly Doug Ford from Ontario, have come out and absolutely lashed out at what Trump is doing here. Why? Is this the right thing to do? Are they making things worse? Do they have no other choice?
Alexia, I think this is, at this point, entirely a question of timing. The first actions, to certainly my surprise, and I think the overwhelming number of commentators who are deeply involved in trade, to their surprise, was against the United States' closest allies and trade partners, Canada and Mexico. But Europe has now followed, and there's an enormous fight now developing between Europe and the United States over the initial steel and aluminium tariffs, which have now been extended to the European Union, with the result that when the European Union retaliated with a set of tariff imposts that included American whiskey, Trump is talking about 200% tariffs on European wine entering into the United States, which is of the order of $5 billion US import bill. So the fight with Europe is at an earlier stage. I think it is largely a consequence of timing. And what will be crucial for us and for the Australians to see is how does this come together over the next few weeks? Because there is a crucial date coming up, which is the 2nd of April. It was originally intended to be on April Fool's Day until somebody with some political common sense pointed out to the administration that starting a trade war on April Fool's Day would give sub-editors a paradise of a field day. So it's shifted to the 2nd of April. And what we will see then is the first tranche or first amount of what are called reciprocal new tariffs. Nobody has any idea what they are, but one issue that has already been highlighted is it may include imposts designed to neutralize VAT, value-added tax, the European equivalent of our GST system. So this is completely off the charts in terms of normal trade policy. We'll have to wait and see what it involves. I mean, the number one issue for us is, will it include New Zealand? We simply don't know. I mean, I can't believe that the hassled, harried officials in USTR and Commerce, the two agencies where the officials with the technical expertise to do this sort of stuff live, I can't believe they can cope with the amount of work they're meant to be doing at the moment. So it's possible that on the 2nd of April, we may find that there's no reciprocal tariffs imposed on New Zealand, but we don't know that. And I would counsel in advance drawing any optimistic conclusions from that. May simply be they'll get around to us later. I don't know. We have to wait and see.
Although it is possible, and gosh, April the 2nd is only 2 weeks away, that by then more trillions will have fallen off the stock exchange and someone will finally say to Trump, you can't keep doing this. We're in recession.
Well, Alexia, that is the really important issue. And people should be thinking about trying to provide an exit strategy for that day in the hope that that day will indeed arrive. But there's no question in my mind that your underlying point is of central importance. This will increase prices in the United States. And at a situation where the previous administration, the Biden administration, got voted out overwhelmingly, inflation was the number one voter concern. And it still remains a huge political concern, as the most casual examination of US domestic politics would tell you. So these prices haven't increased yet because of tariffs, because there was a surge of imports to try and get around the scheduled introduction of these tariffs. So this is all going to eventually feed through into uncertainty in the United States. And there's no question now, nobody's quite sure as to whether this is something that is going to develop into a very serious problem for the United States. But there are very clear signs of consumer confidence starting to drain from the US economy. Whether this is sustained and deepened will be a crucial issue. And consumption is about 70% of the US economy. So these, what I call guardrails around Trump, they take time to come into effect. And the most important of them are the economic guardrails, because they will then feed through into the delicate political balances in the United States. And if you're sitting up there as a member of the House of Representatives, don't forget this is a huge parliament, their lower house, as it were, 454 members. The last vote that went through on the budget passed with one vote. So the Republican Party isn't in some fortress position here. And as these economic realities start to impose themselves on political attitudes, we may well see some type of resolution in the relatively near future. Nobody can really game this out with any precision. Just be aware of the different options would be my advice.
And say what you will about Trump, but he does seem to be able to tap into the zeitgeist. If he starts realising that the people of America are turning against him, could that be?
Well, precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. And, I mean, also, he's got this remarkable capacity, at least in public, to put aside vicious things said about him in the past by certain people and just move on. So, yes, he has got a demonstrated capacity for spinning on a dime.
Let's look at England now. Some really interesting headlines from The Guardian. Starmer plays royal card as he tiptoes around the madness of King Donald. The British Prime Minister is the latest would-be Trump whisperer from Europe to butter up a capricious president. It's all very well, I guess, the media pointing out the obvious is that there's a lot of grease going on at the top level.
Well, so it would seem, and my opinion of Starmer, who I've never met, obviously, or had any dealings with him, just filtering views through the media, went up 100% as a result of that performance. I knew exactly what he was doing.
We're talking about when he took out this wonderful letter.
Absolutely. This has never been done before, Mr. President.
This is really special. This has never happened before. This is unprecedented.
And I thought he was absolutely brilliant. Of course, I'm not writing op-eds for The Guardian. So I'm looking at this from a professional's point of view in terms of how to manage a situation of immense importance to a major European country like the UK. I think Starmer did exactly the right thing. In fact, I'll send him another pellet of butter to go with his next meeting.
But when do we stop doing this? You know, at what stage does Trump get so outrageous that you just have to stand up and say enough, that the whole world has to line up on the other side?
Well, no, we don't need to do that. It'll be the American people through the very things we've been discussing that will put constraints on him. He's not going to be constrained by, quote, strong and principled arguments made in public against him. It's just a fantasy, I'm sorry. However satisfying it might feel to say them at the time.
Some really interesting comments from Malcolm Turnbull, and now he's really doubled down on them.
Are we just going to become, just a conga line of sycophants creeping through the White House, paying homage to this guy and telling him he's a genius?
Who has called out Trump at a time when Australia is really negotiating its own steel and aluminium tariffs with America. In fact, Australian journalists have called out Turnbull for saying this out loud at such a sensitive time. And, he said, well, someone's got to say it. How awkward is that for Australia, even recognising that Turnbull's off the political shelf now? He's a commentator only, really, in effect. Trump still noticed what he said, tweeted about it, and there could be repercussions.
My view is that Turnbull should have kept his mouth shut on those sorts of issues. It's not that, it's not a legitimate thing to say in private, but for somebody with the status of a former prime minister to enter into that fray, I don't think it's going to help the Australian government in the current situation. That would be my view, but that's a traditionalist view. It's not like it have any positive effects. It can only complicate the Australian government's position.
I guess his feeling is, though, he wants to be seen as being a sort of truth teller, if you like, calling.
Yeah, but you see, my view is that that's based, that argument that we saw in the Guardian article that I also saw is premised on what I think is a completely naive view that it will be, external people telling it how it is going to change Trump's opinion. I think that is BS. The reality is that what will change Trump's opinion are the guardrails of an economic, political, and legal nature that will impact on the political process inside the United States. I mean, for example, just take the S&P 500, a source of vast trillions of dollars of wealth, and it's just lost nearly 10% in its value since the inauguration of President Trump. So much for the golden age of America. I came across this quite remarkable data point a week or two ago, which pointed out that 41% of the revenues of those giant companies in the S&P 500 come from abroad. 41%. So 48% of Meta sales come from abroad. 64% of MasterCard sales come from abroad. 49% of IBM sales come from abroad. In other words, this hated globalization is the very basis of the top 500 listed companies of the United States, and they are hurting right now. It's all very well to pile on around globalization as if this is, a 21st century version of calling somebody 200 years ago Antichrist. But the reality is that it's very difficult to undo globalization without a great deal of cost. It is abundantly clear that although top chief executives of the US companies concerned are terrified of President Trump, in private, they're absolutely tearing their hair out. So that's what will change opinion, not, quote, strong and principled statements from a former Australian Prime Minister.
Can we talk about King Charles? He's a wily old bloke, isn't he? Wearing Canadian military medals while inspecting a British ship the other day.
Well, look, the British monarchy hasn't survived since the Stuart days by not having some political nous. I thought it was very clever.
Could he be one of the answers to making sure that Britain is on Trump's good side? Like Keir Starmer says, a second historic invitation to palaces? Quite
clearly, yes, because, one of the peculiar things about Americans is they do love royalty. They love titles like that. For example, if you've been a general or an ambassador in the United States, you are forever a general ambassador because they don't have any lords, ladies, and counts to cast around because they made this ridiculous decision in 1789 not to create an American aristocracy.
You might not want to, but are you able to comment so far on how New Zealand is handling this, sort of keeping our head down a bit? Are we on the right track?
Well, I'll repeat what I said. I think what New Zealand has done now by taking a very low profile is 100% right. Now, it's not going to be good copy for people in your profession, to listen to these anodyne statements, but you've heard my strong view. That is exactly the right thing to do, what they're doing. I don't want to make light of this. And in counselling essentially a very orthodox, low-key approach, which I think is a very fair way of characterising how the government is playing it, with Mr. Peters being, if you like, the tip of the spear of our country on this occasion. I think this is exactly right. But of course, it doesn't give a great deal of satisfaction because people want to hear, quote, strong statements of principle. Yeah, but that's not going to work. And I think we should maintain the course that has been set by the government. I'm strongly in favour of it.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was engineered by Jeremy Ansell and produced by Alexia Russell and Gwen McClure. Thank you to Tim Groser. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Mā te wā.